December 15, 1941. 11:47 p.m. The Spanish border near Urrugne, France. André de Jong crouched in frozen mud behind a limestone outcrop, her breath creating small clouds in the mountain air. 3 men pressed against her back, 2 British pilots and 1 Canadian navigator, all shot down over Belgium in the past 14 days. Below them, a German patrol of 8 soldiers swept flashlights across the mountain path they needed to cross. In 23 minutes, the moon would be high enough to expose them completely. André was 24 years old, weighed 93 pounds, and had convinced exactly no one in British intelligence that she could do what she was about to attempt. The lead German soldier stopped. His flashlight beam traced the rocks 12 feet from where they hid. Before we continue with André's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the Spanish border, December 1941, where André de Jong was about to make a decision that would define the rest of her life. André Marie Louise de Jong was born August 30, 1916, in Schaerbeek, Belgium, the daughter of Frédéric de Jong, a schoolteacher with socialist convictions and a quiet stubbornness that his daughter inherited completely. She grew up in a modest 3-room apartment above a bakery on Rue de la Limite, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with her father's cigarette smoke every morning. At 5 feet 1 inch, with delicate features and what her friends called sparrow bones, André looked like someone who might faint at the sight of blood. She was, in fact, a commercial art student who had been training as a nurse when Germany invaded Belgium on May 10, 1940. By May 28th, King Leopold III had surrendered. By June, the occupation was complete. André watched German soldiers march through Brussels and felt something she would later describe as a physical revulsion, like swallowing metal. She was 23 years old. She had never been outside Belgium except for one trip to Paris when she was 16. She spoke French, Flemish, and enough English to order tea. She had exactly 0 experience in espionage, combat, or clandestine operations. What she had was a bicycle, a nursing certificate, and an unshakable belief that doing nothing was worse than death. The problem started immediately after Dunkirk. Between June and December 1940, hundreds of British and Allied soldiers were stranded across occupied Europe, shot down pilots, separated infantry, escaped prisoners of war. They hid in attics, barns and basements across Belgium, France and the Netherlands, surviving on the charity of terrified civilians who could be executed for helping them. The official British policy was clear. Sit tight, wait for liberation. But liberation might take years, and the Gestapo was hunting methodically, street by street, house by house. The statistics were brutal. Of the estimated 840 Allied servicemen trapped in Belgium by December 1940, fewer than 40 made it back to England through existing networks. The rest were captured and sent to prisoner of war camps, or worse, executed as spies if caught out of uniform. The survival rate was less than 5%. André began by hiding 2 British soldiers in her father's apartment in August 1940. She had no plan beyond keeping them fed and out of sight. The men, Sergeant William Cox from Manchester and Private Arnold Deppe from Liverpool, had been separated from their units during the retreat to Dunkirk and had walked 140 miles back to Brussels, sleeping in ditches and stealing vegetables from farms. Cox was 21, Deppe was 19. They looked like exhausted children. "How do we get home?" Cox asked her in halting French. André had no idea. She told them she would figure it out. It was her friend Elvire de Grief who changed everything. Elvire, 38 years old, the wife of a schoolteacher in the Basque country near the Spanish border, had been smuggling refugees since the start of the war. In September 1940, André traveled by train to Anglet, France, crossing 3 German checkpoints with forged papers identifying her as a commercial artist visiting family, to meet Elvire and learn the routes through the Pyrenees. "You're a child," Elvire said when she saw André. "They'll kill you in a week." "Then I'll have a week," André said. Elvire taught her the mountain paths, how to read weather patterns, which guides could be trusted, and which would sell you to the Germans for 50 francs, how to walk in darkness without a flashlight, how to cross rivers without leaving boot prints, how to identify Spanish civil guard patrols from a kilometer away. The training took 11 days. On September 22, 1940, André walked Cox and Depay across the Pyrenees and into Spain. The journey took 14 hours. They traveled only at night, sleeping in shepherds' huts during the day. The temperature dropped to near freezing. Cox developed a fever. Depay twisted his ankle on loose scree and had to be half-carried the last 8 kilometers. When they reached the British consulate in Bilbao, Cox cried, "You're insane," the British consul told André. "You'll never do this again." She went back to Belgium and did it 17 more times in the next 6 months. By March 1941, André had personally escorted 26 Allied soldiers to safety. She called her network the Comet Line, Comet in French, because, as she told her father, "We appear, we move quickly, and we disappear." The name stuck, the operation grew. Her father, Frederick, became her primary organizer in Brussels, managing safe houses and forged documents. Elvire de Greef coordinated the French side of the network. Baron Jean Grindel, a Belgian aristocrat with contacts in Swiss banking, provided funding and diplomatic cover. Volunteers appeared, shopkeepers, priests, farmers, teachers, each one risking execution to move one more pilot closer to freedom. But the mortality rate for the helpers was staggering. Between June 1940 and May 1941, the Gestapo captured and executed 47 Belgian resistance members involved in smuggling Allied servicemen. The average survival time for a courier was 8 months. The Gestapo's methods were efficient: surveillance, infiltration, torture, public execution. They posted photographs of the executed in town squares as warnings. André's closest friend in the network was Nadine Dumont, 22 years old, from Lille, France. Nadine had been a law student before the war and had a photographic memory that made her invaluable for memorizing routes and contact addresses without carrying written records. She and André had moved 18 pilots together between January and April 1941. They worked in perfect synchronization, André leading, Nadine covering the rear, both carrying forged papers and maintaining cover stories about being cousins visiting family in the south. Nadine always talked about after the war. She wanted to finish her law degree. She wanted to open a practice in Paris, specializing in international law. She and André had a pact. When this was over, they would take a real vacation together. Somewhere warm, somewhere with no mountains and no Germans. "Tunisia," Nadine said. "I want to see Carthage." "I want to see anywhere that isn't the Pyrenees," André replied. On April 19, 1941, Nadine was arrested at a checkpoint outside Lille. She was carrying forged identity papers for a Canadian pilot named James Crowley. The Gestapo interrogator, Obersturmführer Werner Kapp, gave her a simple choice: provide the names of her contacts or be sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Nadine provided nothing. She was executed by firing squad on May 2, 1941 at Fort de Bondues. She was buried in an unmarked grave. The Germans sent a notice to her family. "Your daughter died as a terrorist and enemy of the Reich." André learned about Nadine's death from a coded message delivered by a priest. She was in Brussels, preparing to leave with 3 pilots the next morning. She read the message twice. She folded the paper carefully. She walked into her bedroom and closed the door. She did not cry. Not then, not later. What she did was make a promise. Every life she saved from that point forward would be in Nadine's name. The problem was trust. By mid-1941, the Comet Line was moving an average of 4 soldiers per week out of Belgium, through France, over the Pyrenees and into Spain. But British intelligence, MI9, the section responsible for escape and evasion, refused to officially recognize André's network. She was too young, too inexperienced, and too female. When she traveled to Gibraltar in August 1941 to request funding and operational support, The MI9 officer laughed at her. "You expect us to believe you walked 3 men across the Pyrenees," the officer said. His name was Commander Michael Creswell. He was 47 years old, a career naval officer who had never been in occupied Europe. "I walked 26 men across the Pyrenees," André corrected. "I'm asking for money to walk more." "Young lady, I don't doubt your intentions, but this is work for professionals." "Then where are your professionals?" André asked. "Because I don't see them in Brussels." Creswell refused the request. No funding, no support, no official recognition. André went back to Belgium and continued anyway. What she realized, alone one night in June 1941, studying a map of occupied Europe by candlelight, was that the Comet Line's greatest strength was the very thing that made MI9 dismiss it. Nobody took her seriously. The Germans saw a small, polite young woman traveling with her cousins to visit family. Border guards waved her through checkpoints. Gestapo officers barely glanced at her papers. She was invisible because she looked harmless. She started using it deliberately. The innovation was simple. Instead of trying to avoid attention, she moved in plain sight. She traveled during the day, on passenger trains, with forged papers identifying her pilots as factory workers, merchants or students. She coached them on their cover stories until they could recite them in their sleep. She taught them to walk like civilians. No military posture, no scanning for threats, no situational awareness. Look bored, look tired, look like you're going to work. And the critical element. She always traveled as a group. 2 or 3 pilots herself, sometimes another female courier. Families traveling together attracted less scrutiny than lone men. The Germans were looking for soldiers trying to sneak across borders. They weren't looking for a young woman escorting her brothers home from factory jobs in the north. The first test of this method was a disaster waiting to happen. July 8, 1941. André was traveling with 3 RAF pilots, Flight Lieutenant Gordon Carter, 23, from Edinburgh, Sergeant William Tuck, 21, from London, and Sergeant Raymond Hale, 22, from Cardiff, all shot down during bombing raids in June. They were taking the 9:15 a.m. train from Brussels to Paris, then connecting to Bayonne, then walking to the Spanish border. The plan required them to pass through 4 major German checkpoints. André dressed them in second-hand suits, purchased from a Brussels tailor. She gave them worker identity papers, listing them as employees of a textile factory in Roubaix. She rehearsed their stories 40 times. They were traveling south to take up jobs at a new factory. They were cousins. They had known each other since childhood. Their French was terrible because they were Flemish. Speak as little as possible. Let André do the talking. "If this doesn't work," Carter said, "we're all going to be shot." "If this doesn't work," André said, "they'll shoot me. You'll just go to a prison camp." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "No," André said. "It's supposed to make you follow the plan." They boarded the train at Brussels South Station. German military police were checking papers at the platform. André walked to the checkpoint first, her identity card in hand, smiling pleasantly. The officer barely looked at her. He waved her through. Carter followed. The officer glanced at his papers, asked a question in German. Carter froze. André stepped back, touched the officer's arm lightly, and launched into rapid French. "I'm so sorry, sir. My cousin doesn't speak German, only Flemish. We're traveling to take up factory positions in the south. He's very nervous about traveling. It's his first time away from home." The officer cut her off with an impatient wave and stamped the papers. Tuck and Hale followed without incident. They sat together in a second-class compartment. The train pulled out of Brussels at 9:22 a.m. For the next 7 hours, André kept up a constant stream of cheerful conversation in French, talking about nothing: the weather, her aunt in Bayonne, the difficulty of finding good coffee during the war. The pilots barely spoke. At the checkpoint outside Paris, German soldiers walked through the train cars checking papers. André smiled at them. One soldier smiled back. They reached Bayonne at 6:40 p.m. They walked to Elvire de Grief's house on Rue Gambetta, where they rested for 2 days. On July 11th, André led them across the Pyrenees. They walked for 11 hours. They crossed into Spain at dawn on July 12th. All 3 pilots made it back to England by the end of the month. Carter would later say, "She saved my life by being braver than any soldier I ever met." The method worked. André repeated it 37 times between July and December 1941. She traveled during the day. She used passenger trains. She relied on the Germans' assumption that a young woman couldn't possibly be dangerous. She coached her pilots until they could pass as civilians. She never carried weapons. Weapons made you a combatant. She never carried written records. Written records got people killed. And she used one more element that nobody else in the resistance had considered. She was unfailingly polite to the Germans. "Bonjour, monsieur." "Merci, monsieur." "Bonne journée, monsieur." She smiled. She made eye contact. She asked about their families. She complimented their efficiency. She treated every checkpoint like a minor bureaucratic inconvenience, not a life-or-death encounter. And the Germans, most of them young men, bored, far from home, tired of the sullen silence they received from every other Belgian, responded by waving her through. It was psychological warfare conducted with manners and a smile. By December 1941, British intelligence could no longer ignore the Comet Line. André had personally escorted 118 Allied servicemen to safety. The network had saved 418 lives total, with volunteers working across Belgium, France, and Spain. The escape success rate, the percentage of soldiers who started the journey and made it to England, was 73%, the highest of any resistance network in occupied Europe. But MI9 still wouldn't officially recognize her. The breaking point came in December 1941. André traveled to Gibraltar again, this time bringing 2 RAF pilots with her as proof. She walked into Commander Creswell's office and put their escape reports on his desk. "These men say you saved their lives," Creswell said. "I did," André said, "and I can save more if you stop wasting my time and give me the funding I need." Creswell studied her for a long moment. "How old are you?" 25. "You're a child. I'm someone who does what you can't," André said. "Now are you going to help me, or am I going back to Belgium to do this alone?" MI9 approved funding on December 23, 1941. 50,000 francs per month, delivered through a Swiss bank account. It wasn't enough, but it was something. André bought train tickets, forged papers, safe houses, and food for the pilots. The Comet Line expanded. More volunteers joined. More lives were saved. But the Gestapo was watching. Between January and June 1942, the Comet Line moved 236 Allied servicemen through Belgium and France. The Germans knew the network existed. They had intercepted radio messages. They had interrogated captured pilots. They had identified several safe houses and arrested the occupants. What they didn't have was the leadership. They didn't have the names at the top. They didn't have André. The Gestapo's strategy was infiltration. They placed undercover agents in Brussels, posing as downed pilots or sympathetic civilians. They monitored train stations. They tracked patterns. They were patient. They waited for someone to make a mistake. The mistake came from someone outside the network. In June 1942, a Belgian collaborator named Jacques Desoubry, a former police officer who had been dismissed for corruption before the war and was now working for the Gestapo, identified one of the Comet Line's couriers in Brussels. The courier, under interrogation, provided the address of a safe house. The Gestapo raided the house on June 7, 1942, and arrested 11 people, including 2 RAF pilots, and the family that had been hiding them. The family, Paul and Marie Maréchal, their 2 daughters aged 14 and 17, and Paul's elderly mother, were executed at Thiers National Shooting Range on June 21, 1942. The Gestapo posted their photographs in the center of Brussels with a sign, "This is the fate of traitors." André was in Paris when it happened. She received the news by coded telegram. She read it in a café on Rue de Rivoli, her hands shaking so badly she spilled her coffee. The Maréchal had hidden pilots for her 7 times. The daughters had sewn civilian clothes for the men. The grandmother had cooked meals and told jokes to keep morale up. André had eaten dinner at their table 2 weeks earlier. She folded the telegram. She paid for her coffee. She walked to the train station and continued her work, because stopping meant that their deaths meant nothing. The Comet Line adapted. André changed routes. She changed safe houses. She changed schedules. She implemented a cell structure. No one person knew more than 3 contacts. If someone was arrested, the damage was contained. She stopped using the same guides twice in a row. She rotated couriers. She moved constantly, never sleeping in the same place more than 2 nights. And she kept walking pilots across the Pyrenees. The crossing was always the most dangerous part. The Pyrenees stretch 430 kilometers along the border between France and Spain, with peaks reaching 300–400 meters. In winter, temperatures drop to -15 degrees Celsius. In summer, the heat could kill through dehydration. The Germans patrolled the French side. The Spanish Civil Guard patrolled the Spanish side. Both sides shot smugglers on sight. The Comet Line used 3 primary routes, all of them brutal. The main route started in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, crossed the mountains near the Col d'Ibardin, and ended in Hernani, Spain. The journey took 8 to 12 hours, depending on weather and the physical condition of the pilots. Many of the men were injured, malnourished, or suffering from exposure. They wore civilian shoes that fell apart on mountain rocks. They had no climbing experience. They had to move in complete darkness to avoid patrols. Andrée led most of the crossings herself. She walked at the front, setting the pace. She carried a small rucksack with bread, cheese, water, and bandages. She wore rope-soled espadrilles that gripped wet rocks better than boots. She knew every path, every stream crossing, every place where German patrols stopped to rest. One pilot, Flight Lieutenant Raymond Worrell, 24, from Manchester, would later describe a crossing in January 1943. "We walked for 9 hours in freezing rain. I couldn't feel my feet. The man in front of me collapsed twice. Andrée picked him up both times. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but she grabbed him under the arms and pulled him to his feet and told him in English, 'You will not die on this mountain. I forbid it.' He walked. We all walked, because she wouldn't let us stop." Between January 1942 and January 1943, Andrée personally conducted 67 crossings. She walked the Pyrenees 134 times, once there, once back. She covered approximately 200 kilometers on foot in mountain terrain. She never lost a pilot to the mountains, 0 deaths, 0 captures during the crossing itself. The Germans couldn't understand it. How was a resistance network moving dozens of men across one of the most heavily guarded borders in Europe? Where were the leaks? Who was leading the operation? They finally got their answer on January 15, 1943. Andrée was in Paris, preparing to leave with 3 American pilots, Lieutenant John Sovich from Ohio, Lieutenant Edward Dollenmeyer from Illinois, and Lieutenant Harold Williams from Texas, all shot down during raids in December 1942. They were scheduled to take the night train to Bayonne on January 16th. But the Gestapo had finally identified one of the Comet Line's Paris coordinators, a bookstore owner named Jean-François Nothomb, and placed him under surveillance. Nothomb didn't know he was being watched. He met Andrée at a café on Boulevard Saint-Michel on January 15th at 2:00 p.m. to deliver forged papers for the Americans. The Gestapo followed him. They photographed Andrée. They followed her back to her safe house. They identified the 3 Americans. They waited until the next morning to make the arrest. They wanted to capture everyone together. At 6:30 a.m. on January 16, 1943, 20 Gestapo agents raided the safe house on Rue Vanneau. They arrested Andrée, the 3 American pilots, and 2 other Comet Line couriers. They found forged documents, money, and maps of the Pyrenees. They had enough evidence to execute everyone in the room. The interrogation began immediately. The lead interrogator was Sturmbannführer Helmut Pauli, a specialist in breaking resistance networks. He had been hunting the Comet Line for 18 months. He now had the woman he believed was a mid-level courier. He didn't realize he had the founder and leader. "Who is in charge of your network?" Pauli asked. "I don't know what you're talking about," Andrée said. "We have evidence you've been helping Allied soldiers escape." "I'm a nurse. I help people." "You were carrying forged documents. Someone gave them to me. I don't know who." Pauli hit her. She fell. She got back up. "Who are your contacts in Brussels?" "I don't live in Brussels." "Who organizes your operations?" "I don't organize anything." The interrogation continued for 6 hours. Pauli used threats, violence, and psychological pressure. He told her they had already arrested her father, a lie. He told her the Americans would be executed because of her, a truth. He offered her a deal, provide names, and they would send her to a work camp instead of executing her. André provided nothing. "You're lying," Paulie said finally. "You're not just a courier. You're someone important." "I'm nobody," André said. They sent her to Ravensbrück concentration camp on February 3, 1943. She was assigned prisoner number 38348. She worked in the camp factory, sewing German uniforms for 12 hours a day. She received 900 calories per day. She watched women die of starvation, disease, and execution. She survived 15 months at Ravensbrück before being transferred to Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. She never gave the Gestapo a single name. The 3 American pilots, Sovich, Dollenmeier, and Williams, were sent to prisoner of war camps. They all survived the war. In 1945, Sovich wrote a letter to the U.S. War Department. "André de Jong saved my life. She deserves the Congressional Medal of Honor. I don't know if she's still alive, but if she is, she should be recognized as one of the bravest people I've ever met." Back in Belgium, the Comet Line continued without her. Her father Frederick took over operations in Brussels. Elvire de Grief continued coordinating the French side. New couriers joined. New pilots were saved. Between January 1943 and September 1944, the network evacuated 358 more Allied servicemen. Frederick de Jong was arrested by the Gestapo in June 1943. He was executed by firing squad on March 28, 1944, at Mont Valérien Fortress outside Paris. He was 61 years old. His last words, recorded by a German officer, were, "My daughter will outlive you all." He was right. The Germans didn't know what they had in André. They knew she was connected to the Comet Line, but they never confirmed she was the leader. She was listed in Gestapo records as a Belgian courier, age approximately 25, considered dangerous but not essential to network operations. The network's ability to function after her arrest convinced them she had been telling the truth, that she was nobody important. It was the greatest deception of her life. In April 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Germany, the SS began evacuating concentration camps. André was at Mauthausen when American forces liberated the camp on May 5, 1945. She weighed 72 pounds. She had survived 2 years and 3 months in concentration camps without betraying a single member of the Comet Line. When the American soldiers found her, she was helping other prisoners walk to the medical tents. She was still working. An American medic asked her name. "André de Jong," she said. "Where are you from?" "Belgium." "What did you do before the war?" "I was a nurse," she said, "and I walked people across mountains." The medic had no idea what she meant. André returned to Belgium in June 1945. Brussels was in ruins. Her father was dead. Nadine Dumont was dead. The Maréchal family was dead. Dozens of Comet Line volunteers had been executed. The network had saved 776 Allied servicemen, the final count verified by MI9 in 1946. The survival rate for the network's leadership was 32%. Most of them were dead, but 776 men had lived. André refused all publicity. She refused interviews. When the British government offered her money, she refused that too. When King George VI invited her to London to receive the George Medal, she accepted the honour and immediately returned to Belgium. She wanted nothing to do with fame or recognition. What she did was return to nursing. In 1946, André joined a Catholic medical mission in Africa. She worked as a nurse in leper colonies in Senegal, Ethiopia, and the Belgian Congo. She spent 30 years in Africa, treating patients in conditions that made the war look comfortable. She lived in mud huts. She slept under mosquito nets. She earned approximately $40 per month. She saved thousands of lives through basic medical care, vaccinations, wound treatment, sanitation, education. Nobody in Africa knew about the Comet Line. Nobody knew she had been a war hero. She was just the small Belgian nurse who worked harder than anyone else and never complained. She married once, briefly, in 1951, a Belgian doctor named Paul Uju, who had also worked in the resistance. The marriage lasted 3 years. They divorced amicably. André told a friend, "I'm not good at being married. I'm only good at working." She finally returned to Belgium in 1976 at age 60. She lived in a small apartment in Brussels, 3 blocks from where she had grown up. She volunteered at a local hospital. She took care of her elderly neighbors. She attended Mass every Sunday. She lived alone and she never talked about the war. In 1985, a British historian named Eiré Neave, himself an escaped prisoner of war who had been helped by resistance networks, published a book about MI9 operations called Saturday at MI9. The book included a chapter on the Comet Line and André's role in its creation and operation. Neave described her as the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She had more courage, more determination, and more integrity than any soldier in the British Army. The book became a bestseller. Journalists contacted André requesting interviews. She refused all of them. When a Belgian television producer offered to make a documentary about her life, she said, "No, thank you, I don't think my life is interesting." She was finally persuaded to give one interview in 1992. When she was 76 years old, the interviewer asked her if she had been afraid during the war. "Of course," André said, "but you continued anyway." "What else was I supposed to do?" she said. "There were people who needed help, so I helped them. That's not courage, that's just what you do. You saved 776 lives." "I didn't save them," André said. "We saved them, all of us, the families who hid them, the guides who walked them across mountains, the people who forged their papers, the people who died so they could live. I was just one person. We were thousands. But you were the leader." "I was a nurse who got lucky," André said. "Nothing more." The interviewer tried to press further. André ended the interview. By the 1990s, André de Jong had been recognized by 4 nations. She received the George Medal from Britain, the Medal of Freedom from the United States, the Croix de Guerre from France, and the Order of Leopold from Belgium. She had been made a countess by the Belgian royal family. She had received honorary doctorates from 3 universities. She kept none of the medals on display. They were in a box in her closet. What she kept on her mantel was a photograph of Nadine Dumont, taken in 1940, before the war had marked any of them. André de Jong died on October 13, 2007, in Brussels. She was 91 years old. The cause of death was heart failure. She died in her sleep, alone in her apartment. Her body was found 2 days later by a neighbor, who had noticed she hadn't collected her mail. Her obituary in Le Soir, Belgium's largest newspaper, was 140 words long. It mentioned she had been a nurse and had worked in Africa. It mentioned she had received several military decorations during World War II. It did not mention the Comet Line. It did not mention that she had personally walked 118 men to freedom. It did not mention that 776 people owed their lives to the network she created. The obituary writer had no idea. She was buried at Brussels Cemetery in Evere, in a simple grave with a small headstone that reads, André de Jong, 1916-2007, nurse. There is no mention of her war service, no mention of the medals, no mention of the lives saved. That's how she wanted it, but the men she saved never forgot. In 2008, surviving members of the Comet Line and Allied servicemen who had been helped by the network raised money for a proper memorial. They installed a bronze plaque at the Royal Military Museum in Brussels that reads, André de Jong, Dédé, leader of the Comet Line. She saved 776 Allied servicemen during World War II by walking them across the Pyrenees to freedom. She was captured, tortured, and imprisoned in concentration camps, but never betrayed her comrades. She refused recognition, seeking neither fame nor reward. She represents the best of humanity, courage without glory, sacrifice without recognition, service without limit. She was 24 years old when she began. She never stopped helping people until the day she died. We remember. 73 veterans attended the dedication ceremony. They were in their 80s and 90s, some in wheelchairs, some with oxygen tanks. Every single one of them stood when her name was read, because they knew something that history almost forgot. André de Jong proved that courage doesn't require recognition, that one person, armed with nothing but determination and compassion, can change the course of a war. That the most powerful weapon against tyranny isn't firepower or strategy or technology. It's a 24-year-old woman who refuses to stop walking. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Stories like Andre's are vanishing from history because nobody is there to tell them. Subscribe to this channel so we can bring you more forgotten stories of courage and innovation from World War II. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, your country and your city. Did someone in your family serve? Do you have a connection to World War II? We want to hear from you. These stories survive because people like you care enough to remember. Thank you for keeping these heroes alive.